Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon what part of the country you're in. I want to welcome everyone to Concurrent Session 3A, which is focused on community development. So we have three presenters today. You can see the titles of our presenters and sessions up on the screen. Hopefully you're in the right place and this is what you wanted to listen to this morning. I do want to quickly say thank you to our sponsors. We have two platinum sponsors, University of Idaho and Washington State University, both extension offices. And then we have a number of bronze sponsors as well, all of the regional rural development centers, as well as a number of other universities. Just a couple Zoom things to keep in mind today. Our sessions are being recorded. I have started that, so keep that in mind. I will be muting any mics that happen to get turned on. Please wait until the Q&A piece to unmute if you choose to ask a question out loud. Primarily, we're looking for you to use the chat for your questions. Each session will be approximately 20 minutes long, and I'll be keeping track of that. So Laura and Michael, if you could keep an eye on the chat, I'll give you a 5-minute warning and then a 1-minute warning. And then Brian Rayson put in a little listening tip in there. If you happen to be looking to multitask and you want to focus, sometimes it helps to play with a pen, a pencil, a cup, something quiet. You'll be muted anyway, so that's okay, to stop from multitasking. Regardless, again, I wanted to say welcome. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that Laura Reeser can go ahead and start sharing hers.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. Let me get set up here. Okay. All right, thanks everyone for being here. I'm excited to share with you all a little bit about some of the work I've been engaged in with a number of colleagues. And it's been a couple of years that we've been connecting around some of our shared work around policy systems and environmental change. And this is something that probably sounds a little bit familiar to you if your work spans into public health at all, or if you work with your with the SNAP-Ed program in your department. I wanted to mention that, yep, my name is Laura Reeser, and I've been working on this with CLIA Rome. These are my co-authors and co-presenters. Well, I'll be the one presenting, but they've been working with me on this. Rebecca Serro, Carrie Backman, and Deborah Hansen. And also, in just a couple slides, I will be asking you guys some questions, so feel free to unmute at that point. Oh no, why are you not advancing? There we go. Okay, so my learning objectives, just so you guys know for today, is to briefly describe the difference between PSC and direct education. I want you guys to understand, because I'm going to describe some of the steps in utilizing a PSC approach, and then to provide an understanding of PSC approaches for your community development work. And I hope we will have a chance to discuss some of that towards the end. So I love maps, and I usually like to start presentations with a place-based image, right? So you have a sense of where I am and where the work that I'm doing is. So this is me based in Bremerton in the western part of the state. One of the things I love about doing this work is having a chance to engage with my colleagues, right? We're given a fair amount of space to develop programs and projects and to collaborate as we find folks doing similar kinds of work. So a couple of years ago, I was working when I first started about 5 years ago. I'm just west of Seattle, working in a peri-urban community where we have a fair amount of open space, but we are really close to a metropolitan region of Seattle. So some of the challenges in our community development work is unique to this type of a community. And then up to the northwest of me is my colleague Clea, a little bit more rural. She has a huge national park right there. And she serves the western part as well of her community, which has a number of tribal nations and really have a lot of access to resource issues. At the same time, our colleague Carrie down in Wahkiakum County has a similar community, very small in terms of numbers of people in her county. And we started chatting about some of our respective, the assets in our communities and the challenges that we face. And at the same time, Deborah, our colleague up in Colville, same kind of thing, right? We had connected a couple of years ago on our respective projects, and we had found some interesting dynamics that we were working on, which is why we sort of came together around this PSC work. And then our colleague, Rebecca Serro, based in Spokane, joined the conversation as well. And so while I'm here west of Seattle working on community food systems, at the same time, Clea had been working on an integrated noxious weed management project. Carrie had been working on with a coastal marine resources advisory group and project. And Deborah had been working on rural broadband. And so while the subjects that we were working on were quite different, we found some very similar themes and approaches, which is how we sort of connected around the PSC work. And then Rebecca is our statewide evaluator. Someone's mic is up. Okay, there you go. Thank you. So as Rebecca has this wonderful perspective of the statewide work, she sort of like has this connector between so many of us around the state that she was able to provide a perspective and sort of ground some of our projects in this approach of PSC. And so just briefly, for those of you not familiar, what is PSC? So you probably know like a policy is a written statement that can change laws, regulations, resolutions, ordinances, or guidance. And I know that this is something that in extension and in universities is a little bit of a gray area for some folks to have a sense of how do we as extension professionals, as faculty and staff, engage in the policy arena. And so, and I've heard extension directors have different perspectives on this. And so this space that I reside in for my specific policy work is a lot around supporting other organizations with developing their own policies, which aren't necessarily legally binding, but might be like a guidance document. So this example came from one of my community's comprehensive plan, which is really a vision document for the community. It's not binding by any means. And so I don't engage in developing code, but I do engage in developing some policies. So systems work is an unwritten action really, or change to a process or rules within an organization, an institution, or community. So it's changing the ways in which an organization operates or in which a community is connected and operates as a result. So an example is a new coalitions formed to improve opportunities for physical activity in a community, right? So many of us in Extension are involved in coalitions and networks, and that really is a fundamental piece of PSC work. And then environmental work or environmental change is a visible and observable change to our built-in physical environment. And so a good example is that you might see all of a sudden sidewalks in a part of your town is installed to improve safe walking routes to schools for kids and families. And so one of the things to keep in mind that we always frame this discussion is that direct education is very needed. This isn't like an either or kind of a situation. And so one of the programs I help to run is to support small farmers in accessing information that impacts their businesses. And so this is one of the lectures that we gave for teaching about labor law and food safety regulations, which is really quite detailed and intricate, and the farmers found really valuable, and especially because we're able to give them connections and contacts to labor and industries and to our State Department of Ag. And then here's another presentation. One of the projects I'd worked on was to help to start an online farmers market. And they chose to become a food co-op. And so they were sharing their end of year financials with folks in the market, in the co-op. And so this is as an example of direct education, right? This is a method that we do need to provide information to folks that we serve and we work with. And Tradition Extension had been doing a lot of direct education. And so SNAP-Ed traditionally, like SNAP-Ed is moving more towards a PSC approach, but traditionally SNAP-Ed had been involved in much more direct education and still do. And that does need to happen in our communities. Like somebody needs to teach like how to cook healthy food. Like what does it look like to prepare healthy food, right? And indirect education being, let's change some of our guidance around what nutrition looks like. And the thing about this approach is that it's really focusing on individual health behaviors. And so when we're looking at how individual health behaviors adds up over time in a community, then we start to look at incidence of chronic diseases. And so the origins of PSC really come from within public health, because as they were looking at some of these numbers in their community for folks with chronic disease issues, they started to realize that when you look specifically at health behaviors, that's really only addressing about 30% of the factors that influence a person's total health. And so when you're doing that, you're missing a huge amount of other reasons and factors that impact someone's health. And so this is where the PSC work comes in. And this is how they started to identify a different approach to addressing health outcomes in a community. And this really is where this 70% is where this equity and justice work comes in a community, because we're looking at all the other pieces, the policies, the systems, the environmental factors that influence someone's health. I mean, the idea that your health and longevity and wellness is connected to your zip code is part of that approach. So here where I live in Western Washington, these are just some of our community indicators, some of the data that we're looking at. And so we're thinking, okay, if we're trying to address some of this, we need a much more, like a larger and integrated approach to addressing some of this. And while some of this is health, public health related, I do reside in some of that space in my work, but what we're trying to look at are the interrelated and dynamic factors that influence an individual's health and not just focus on an individual's behavior. And so I'm very much like a process person, right? And so I just wanted to provide a little bit of an outline for what this work looks like and like how to do it. This by no means is in any specific order, and I'm sure many of you already take action in a number of these ways. I like to say that, and one of you probably already know, community development work really can be quite messy when you're in the community doing the work with many different personalities and people, right? And so sometimes you'll find yourself, right, you'll have a group that you work with and you are focused over here, and then all of a sudden another issue pops up that comes at you as a coalition or a group. And so needing to be able to pivot to focus on that and understand what the data is around that is really important. For example, one of our health coalitions that I helped to start a couple of years ago with our health district, we were recently, we've been focusing on physical activity, access to opportunities for physical activity and food. And we were just contacted by a community group that our community center right in downtown, where we have a significant population that just has a lot of need. They were really concerned with the amount of needles that were around their community gardens that they had just put in, right? And had sort of put a call out, is this something that you guys can address? And so this is something we brought into the coalition, and not anything that we were looking to change, but that came to us. And so one of the things we were going to do is to reach out to our the municipality and all of the local organizations that operate around there and some local residents to talk about what this work looks like, right? And so it's not that we have the answers necessarily, but we want to take a look at all of like the evidence, understand the problem, engage with our residents, assess the social and political environment. And so again, this isn't necessarily in order, but that these pieces are sort of happening at any different time along the process. Just to give a couple examples, I had mentioned this earlier on, some of the policy change that we have done here locally in Kitsap County is to incorporate some new food policies into the comprehensive plan. This was back in 2016. And this was really the first time I had done a significant amount of policy work with the county government and the community development folks there and the planners. And so what was really terrific is that, well, before they had never had any food policies in their comprehensive plan. And so we formed a food policy council and worked with our elected officials and our county commissioners and staff, and were able to get about 40 new food policies put into this plan. And again, this isn't anything that's like legally binding, but this is something that's a vision document for the community, for other organizations to be able to lean into and make progress on. Some of the work that my colleague Clea has done up in the northwest part of the state is that, in terms of her systems work, is that she was able to change and support the change of a food bank's procurement strategies. And so they had helped to start this Peninsula Food Coalition, and just starting to connect these very small supply chains, right? And so since as Extension, we have a lot of relationships with folks growing food and building relationships with other people and other organizations in the community over time, and granted this work takes a fair amount of time, she was able to help be like a bridge between the folks looking to do some small contracting locally with some food banks who had just a small amount of money. So they started with these really micro contracts with really small farms. And then over time, the food banks were reprioritizing their budget to invest in this local food for their folks that they were serving in the food bank. And so, and this chart has just gone up in terms of the food bank's investment in the local food economy, but it was really amazing to see just how much interest and how success this has been up there. And so this is just an example of a terrific systems change. Here in the town I live in Bremerton, we have a number of independently owned corner stores that don't really have many fresh food options for the residents who live right there, because a lot of people go to these stores from the community that they walk to, so they're not in a vehicle. And so an example of our environmental change is that we had this corner store project. And so we worked with the managers of those stores and the staff to help them both procure some fresh food options and then literally just place the food that they already had in a different location so that when folks came into the store, it was like very obvious. So this is just an example of an environmental change that you can just see in front of you. Okay, so we're going to do a little review. Let me check the time. Okay, five more minutes. So is this policy systems or environmental change? And this is where I want you guys, whoever wants to give the answer, we're going to just do a little quiz here. A local county government formally writes and implements a plan to only supply fruits and vegetables as snacks in its youth serving programs. Is this policy systems or environmental change? Anybody? Does anybody want to take a guess?
Policy, because it's written.
Hey, there you go. Good job. Yeah, true. It is right there. Okay, a downtown business district directs traffic away from bikers on a busy street with no bike lane using cones. What would this one be?
Environment?
Yes, very good, Carrie. A food bank provides participants with educational materials about cooking healthier items. This is a little bit of a trick question. Okay.
Isn't that behavioral, isn't it?
Yep, so this is an example of just a direct education. Yep, exactly. A school principal decides to open their track and field areas after school hours for local community members to use. So this would be an example of a systems change because it's changing. The school has decided to operate differently. So it's really based on a process or operations. So that's a systems change, which is actually something here in our community we're really hoping schools might be open to, because we don't have a whole lot of parks here. All right, just for the last couple minutes, because it's amazing how quickly this goes, I'm going to go really briefly through a couple more examples of PSC, specifically really in community development, because I'm hoping that this might provide some, just again, like a thinking about the application to your own community development work. So this is a graphic that our colleague Deborah Hansen and her connections created based on the work that she did around addressing rural broadband in northeastern Washington. So one of the things I wanted to highlight was that it took a lot of time. I don't know that she's on the call right now. So I don't know how many years it took to create her the broadband action team that she helped to facilitate, but that was really like a core piece that led to all this other work happening. Over time, that led to the expansion of high-speed internet in an unserved community where she lives in really rural Washington. And in her policy arena, she facilitated virtual sessions with partners for the federal and state legislative staff in the Washington state legislature. But during COVID, because she had already done all this work, and this was such a high need, and COVID really illuminated the huge gap in access to to internet around the country. She hosted FCC Chairman Pai to discuss broadband mapping errors, right? And so she was able to leverage a lot of this groundwork she'd been doing into some much higher level visible work that's having some really incredible impact locally. So this is very exciting work that Deborah and her colleagues there and partners have been working on. So one other example of PSC and community development is a project I had worked on for mapping our food environment to inform where we would put our attention and resources and projects to focus. And so the map at the top is showing this right here, the shaded purple area delineates the 1 mile radius around a supermarket. And so this is where our most dense sort of population center is. And so that's overlaid with some poverty rates from the American Community Survey data. And so you can look in these areas here in the red. Anyone who's sort of in the red, residents that are in the red and further out from the zone is really where we're focusing on our corner store project to make sure that there are healthy options available for folks here. And so this is a systems and environmental change that we're doing here, because it's going to lead to changes that you can visually see in the community. And then the map at the bottom shows where our WIC authorized retailers are, where our stores that accept WIC benefits are, and then where our folks who are part of the WIC program reside. And so what we found through this mapping project is that, for one, we really don't have very many WIC stores. And then second is that really the stores exist in places where our folks in the program don't, where the folks live, there are not really any stores. And so we're trying to tie these two together to increase the amount of and support stores who do accept WIC in the areas that is most needed based on the population where they live. All right, I know I'm at 20 minutes, so I'm almost done. And then one of the last projects I wanted to point out what Carrie was doing is that she works with her group, and there's the Marine Resources Committee to actually fund and build a new fish processing facility, because culturally, fishing is a huge sector there. And so this is one of the key pieces in their supply chain that was going to be able to leverage all the businesses to be able to get their product processed there and then to markets in Portland. And this is the last slide. Really, the backbone to all of this is our Coalition Council Alliances and network work, which I know many of you are involved in as well. And the idea that we're building constellations in a community and not stars, and that the systems change work is part of this. And then as extension professionals, and I love this slide because this is all the different kind of dynamics that are happening at once, right? And so we find ourselves acting as the conveners sometimes, we're the bridgers, sometimes we introduce people, we're coordinating at the same time, and sometimes there's coaching happening, there's the map makers, and so this is all happening at once, like within this PSC framework. So that's the end of my presentation. I know I was not able to go into a deep dive into any of it, but I hope it was helpful in understanding a little bit of the PSC framework that we've been applying and taking from public health and adapting into community development.
Thank you, Laura. You have about 2 minutes, and there are a couple questions in the chat. 2 of them are from Melissa Hamilton. She has one way at the top and then one in the middle. And then Carrie Boone was asking about graphics and slide, and then someone else said slide deck. So given that it's about out of time and you've stopped sharing, you can probably respond in chat to those questions. There's some time. I want to give Michael Doherty, who's up next, the opportunity to load his slide deck and get us started on our next session. And Michael, I'll give you a 10-minute and a 5-minute warning, and then I'll pop on at the end to close you out. Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, I think everyone should be able to see my title slide. Good day to everybody. I know, and particularly for those on the West Coast who's still morning too. What I'm looking at is community characteristics and development outcomes, the expectations versus reality. And what this is all about is now 5 years ago, there's an article in the Atlantic, or actually a series of articles, basically talking about the trip that James and Fallows and Deborah Fallows took across the country, and what they found in communities they thought as prospering, thought as doing well. And what has happened is there's an implicit understanding that these is what make communities move forward. But there's not been a lot of attempts at taking this description and seeing if it actually meets reality. So I'm at it again. The reason I say again is that I did this before. This is just the picture from the article and a link to the article. You can, if you just searched it, it was in the March 2016 issue, so a little bit more than 5 years ago, of The Atlantic, which interestingly enough is volume 317, issue 2. So what does this, essentially what I'm trying to do is figure out how to predict success. The 11 signs that the city will succeed was put forth as one of these articles related to their trip across the country, looking at how America rebounds, grows together, grows back. And it was very descriptive, and there's no data. It's all anecdote. So want to figure out, we've got these concepts. Do they point out anything? Do they really get at what we want to see as far as what we consider development? And so I decided to put the two to the test again. The reason I say again is that 3 years ago at NACDEP, I presented a study looking at the county level. And of the relationships that I looked at, only 12 of 88 were significant in the expected direction at the 0.10 level. So I've got a very low level of significance with an N of 55, and didn't really find much to support what was put out there. The concept presence of big plans was the most reliable factor in predicting development outcomes that would be desirable. You saw changes in employment, total wages, and population were all positively related to that. Similarly, the most influenced by the various factors was the indicator was population. And you saw the presence of university, unique schools, big plans, and microbreweries all led to having population, which was measured by population change, being seeing positive influence. So if you had a university, you saw that, or unique schools, or big plans, or microbreweries all saw positive and statistically significant changes in population between the two. The counties that, and again, I looked at this at the county level, it's an N of 55 in West Virginia. This time I came at it from, one thing that struck me though was that it was just such variation. Counties are big creatures. In extension, we work at the county level most often, but they're hundreds of square miles and very much, differences from one end to another. We have a county in West Virginia the size of Rhode Island, over 1,000 square miles, and many others in the 700-800 square mile range. And a community, trying to describe a community from that might be 30 miles from another community in total is often folly. So I wanted to look at this at a municipal level, and given that we're in a different time now, I thought this would be a unique opportunity. So I basically replicated my study with some modifications given the different unit of analysis, proxy measures for each statement, using, and the idea that development means change or advancement in these indicators, using ANOVA, analysis of variance, to compare the group. And I looked at the 10 largest cities in West Virginia as my test case. There are 12 cities now above 10,000, according to the most recent census estimates in West Virginia. When I first started working here in the state, there were 15. The difference being that the latter two, the 11th and 12th, were actually suburbs or satellite cities of larger cities. So it made sense to not examine them. And the 12th one is going to fall below 10,000 population, most likely in the next census. So it'll only be 11. So I figured 10 was a good number and move forward with that. The measurements, if you're not familiar with Fallow's articles, the success with things like away from divisive politics. And last time I had a county commission being a unified party, a 3-member county commission, either being all Republicans or all Democrats. This time I actually had 3 measures: a nonpartisan council, a weak, and by that I mean council elected mayor, or a city manager as to head administration. Picking out local patriots, I looked at anchor institutions, either a hospital or higher education for this. Public-private partnerships being real. Just like last time, I used greater share of private employment in the city than in the state, as my indicator here. So that you had private employment, so you could have the public-private partnerships was the rationale for that construction. People knowing the Civic story. And I had two measurements, a municipal folk festival, which got you about the background of what places are, and a beer festival. Why did I use beer festival? Because I could get that data, which is sometimes one of the weaknesses of any type of study that's done like this, but also because it was bringing people together and was something that had come up, and you could, so I thought it might make a difference. The downtown having a core, and so I looked at city-focused downtown development, not redevelopment, not urban, renewal efforts. There are such bodies. Those were not what I was looking at. I was looking at specific agencies or entities that focused on that. And similar to, because what I used last time was a county level measurement, very similar to that. Near Research University, president of a four-year institution in the city. And all of them call themselves universities, so it's that existed. So it's very easy, the 6 I found. Hazard cares about a community college, one measure, and again, same as last time, a 2-year community technical college in the city. I did not look at private trade schools. I used the state list of community technical colleges because I think that's really what the fellows were getting at. Has unusual schools. Just like last time, I used the U.S. News and Best high school study, except that I did look at those serving the city as opposed to being a county-wide measure. So, for example, there's one community where the county had a high school, but it didn't. These students did not attend it from the city I was examining, so they did not get credit for it. And in this case, I took the top 25 high schools in West Virginia, which also ended up as the top-ranked high schools in the nation, or top half of the ranking in the nation, were the cutoff. Make themselves open, a diversity measure. Last time I picked the counties that were more diverse than state. This year I used what seems like an arbitrary number of 13.6%. That's the share of the national population, according to the most recent estimates, that is African American. So if the total of all minorities in these cities was greater than 13.6%, I say that they were diverse. And equating diversity with openness, I know can be problematic, but using data, it's a good first snapshot. Having big plans, that meant the city government would have an economic programs or focus. So activities such as a revolving loan fund or a strategic plan is what got the city government's indicating about having plans, and having a craft brewery, a microbrewery located in the city. It's pretty much the same as last time. If the change was from county to city, I didn't mark it as being different, but sometimes some of the modifications were similar, like, and that's what the asterisk and the degree sign indicate. I had to create new ones because of data challenges and using sources that you could readily get at. The census data, state public data, city websites, organizational information, such as the information on brewery fest, microbreweries, and brewer festivals came from Brilliant Stream, a organization that works with microbreweries in West Virginia. And in the previously noted list of high schools from U.S. News. And I always want to say and World Report because that's how old I am. I remember when I actually had that piece on it too. So the indicators, they influenced by previous research, things like deployment, looked at per capita, seeing how many jobs they provided, change, which was the same as last time, and what I called worker importation. What percentage of the workforce is having to come in who don't live in the city? Income, both a per capita and a change measure. Quality of life, which is what I would call the other three things. I looked at poverty rate, labor force participation rate, and population changed. I used most recent data available, which is mostly 2019, or except for employment, which is 2018, and I changed, any change was measured from 2010. And I used census data source of the American Community Survey and on the map. On the map function was very useful for getting the employment numbers, which were not available in any updated form on the American Community Surveys. I found some results. Employment, if you had a beer festival, you had higher employment per capita. If you were diverse. You had higher employment per capita. If you were bringing more workers in, the more likely you were to do that if you had a beer festival, or if you had a diverse population, or if you had a microbrewery. And you had a higher labor force participation rate if you had a city manager form of government. And I'll go back and explain what all of these mean, or what I think they mean, but I just wanted to present the results of the analysis. That was 6 of the relationships explored had a 95% confidence level, 8 more at a 90% confidence level. Employment per capita, both the presence of a university, a top high school, a microbrewery, was all higher per capita with those factors present than without. Employment change, you had greater employment change, or in many cases, less employment loss if you had a beer festival. Employment importation, more likely to import employees if you had a university. Higher income per capita if you've got a government-focused economic development program. So that was the what we talked about the government taking and having specific programs that worked on economic development issues. And an income change was you're likely to have better results with either nonpartisan council or the weak council elected mayor. And then 4 ANOVAs were significant at 90% level in the inverse direction. You actually had higher poverty rates when you've had a higher education anchor. You had higher poverty rates if you've got a development-focused agency in their community. So if you're working in economic development, those communities that had that actually had higher poverty rates, not lower. You had the population change. You had lower rates of, well, higher rates of decrease. This is West Virginia cities, where if you had a folk festival and you had a lower labor force participation rate with the city manager form of government present. Again, these are what I found, and we'll tell you a little bit, so I wanted to present those before I got into discussion. So generally, what do I think? I think there's some meaningful value. One difference between the 2018 county survey and this one was that the explanatory power was quite high. Everything I looked at that was statistically had an adjusted R-square of above 20%, and one not significant at the 90% level. It actually was had a P-score of 0.107, so it's just outside that range. Now that may just be the result of the small n, that we had high explanatory relationship, but very different than a lot of these things I put forth. And some relationships are difficult to explain. And this is both the causation versus correlation, which is very apparent. Fallows was putting forth that if you had these, you will develop, and it may be you have these because you developed in some cases. And the more I get into the data, the more I'm not sure that there's they may be connected, but the order, it's the proverbial chicken and the egg issue. So some of the discussion, most of the variables that were significant in the expected direction related to employment. University presence, there were 2 of those, and universities can result in more opportunities, which in turn lead to more development jobs. So this made sense that having a university in your community would be good for employment. Top high school, similarly, it's a little bit harder to directly say that the high school produces jobs, but it does make it such that you attract people because people look at school zones. And while West Virginia has the school district is a county construct, there are many counties and many places that have, multiple high schools. I actually, my son will be graduating in 3 days from high school, but not the one closest to us. The way the districts are drawn, he actually goes 10 miles from our house rather than the one that we could hear the football games on Friday night. And that can play a difference of where someone chooses to live, and may then lead to that place being more developed, being better off. Diversity. And you can make a case that increased diversity can make a place more desirable, leading to opportunities. or maybe that you have places more diverse because it had more opportunities. People came there for jobs, and different people came there for jobs. We've seen throughout history people migrating, internal migration within this country where employment existed. People left the South and went to Detroit when it was the automaking capital of the world. So how this is the best example of something where there's a relationship, but the directionality, which is implied in the Fallows article, cannot be taken for granted. It really can't be proved. The beer festivals, and two of them had adjusted R square values over 50%. Basically, the more I looked at it, the more it's like, yes, they're doing this because they're affluent. So this may actually, these are coming about because there's money in the community, because there is jobs. So yes, it's a sign of employment. The sign's going to do well, but it's not causing them to do well. Microbreweries, I think, had the same explanation. You look at it, this is something that occurs because things are going well, not that when it occurs, things will go well. Income, are even harder to explain, the three significant relationships with expected direction. The income per capita being related to government economic development focus is understandable, because you would think if you're working in economic development, you are going to produce some economic development that's going to lead to higher income. But the income change related to nonpartisan council or weak mayor, the two of the three indicators of the lack of the divisive politics, could just, it might mean that you get better results when you aren't arguing, or it could just be statistical noise. It's hard to say. The quality of life indicators, the results are, most of them were inverted. The only expected relationship was between labor force and council manager. And in that case, that the same statement goes for the comment. The same thing goes for the statement related to politics before. Poverty rate related to presence of universities and development focused, being higher. That actually makes sense, because universities often are not places where you see, university towns, students don't often have jobs that pay. They're often, if you took them, they would be at poverty rate, but they're getting other income, so they're much better off than their income shows. And that's known because of the way some of the retail stores took a long time to learn that. But similarly, sometimes those development-focused agencies exist because there's the need for development. Population change inversely related to folk festivals may just mean that they're trying to lure people back or to their community when they have them. And the labor force participation inversely related to microbreweries, that's just statistical noise. As the best I can tell, I have no good I can't think through why that occurs. Generally, the analysis don't fully support the anecdotes put forth by Fallows. They're good, but there's not the numbers aren't there to prove it. Still, aspirationally, these do remain important, as these are good characteristics you want to see in your community. They may be necessary for development, but not sufficient. They may need to be part of, considered in total. And they also may be the result of good things happening. So they're indicators that you're doing well, not the factors that are leading to you doing well. Related to COVID, just since we are dealing with this, it's good to note that some of the things that you want to think about if you're working to help communities recover, the link between education and economic development is strong. And likewise, places that are more diverse do seem to do better. Not sure which comes first, but there is that connection is real. That as you're coming back, if you can supporting microbreweries and that means that if you didn't have them before, or they were foundering and they start doing better, that's a sign of success. And you do want to plan for the desired future with consensus building. You want to eliminate politics where possible. Finally, the negative relationships, you don't want to be afraid of things. You know, universities are great anchor institutions, but they are going to cause your poverty rate to look really high because of students being technically impoverished. But you don't be afraid of that. And then also that you see that amenities and festivals can be recruitment tools, as well as just symbols. I mean, even though they may be negatively related to development, study, you know, general things. It's, you know, data availability, small number, and the correlation versus causation are the big pictures. Plus, it may need to, it needs to be addressed in total would be much more successful. So I want to look beyond West Virginia. I want to get more places and search for partners really who can help take this to the next level. And with that, I've got a few minutes for questions. I'll see if there's anything in the chat. I'll stop. There we go. That brought me out of the, stop the sharing. So yeah. I've got a few minutes here, so I'll see who, I mean, does anyone, I mean, I wanted to leave some time here for discussion.
So Michael, this is Steve Turner.
Hey, Steve.
I enjoyed your presentation. Glad you're following up your 2018 study. I guess one of the questions I have on the future of this research, you've looked at counties, and then you've looked at 10, I guess I would call them mini metros, I mean 10,000 and above. I guess my question has to do with your, do you see any, is there an optimal unit, so to speak? I mean, or what unit do you think is would be the golden, kind of golden rule? You did counties, you did metro. Yeah.
I honestly thought that I'd see more in these cities. They were between 50, they were 8 are MSAs and 2 are micro SAs. They're between 15 and 50,000, because beyond that, you're getting to the point you don't have community, but below that, you know, at a certain point you don't have enough. I probably could take it down to some smaller places, but I wouldn't go less than 5,000 because you totally lose data at that point. Data availability becomes a big issue once you get below that number. I guess that's the big question. Is the fallows, you know, I've looked at their thing. I still don't have a lot of good idea of where they focused, what their communities were. But one of them was having a downtown core, so you know there's got to be some sort of mass. I mean, if they're talking about places of 2,000 and 3,000, then you're in deep. You're in. It's very difficult because you can't get data on places that small to start proving these assertions. But I'm struggling to. There's so many things we put out there in community development, and so many things we take as the given truth that really don't have a firm backup. And that's what I want to be able to show, and what I've been trying to show with this. So I'm not sure. I thought I was there, but obviously either A, I wasn't, or B, the data just doesn't support it. And I think I've got time for. Someone asked if I looked at proximity to large metro areas. I did run. You know, one of the things about only having 10 is I had to make sure I had enough in each group. MSA and micros didn't have it because of the 8-2 split. I did run if they were part of a consolidated statistical area, and there were no statistically significant results for that, which is why I did not discuss it. So that would be one. I mean, now this is West Virginia, so the nearest we have to any large metropolitan area would be 75 miles. I mean, Morgantown is 75 miles from Pittsburgh. But there's like, I mean, about half the places I looked at are part of CSA, Consolidated Statistical Areas, and it made none of the results were statistically significant, as I said, so it doesn't seem to make that much of difference. And with that, I think I'm out of time. My contact information was up there, so feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. I'm actually the next presenter, and you can see there is a whole host of us that are part of this project. I will be the only one presenting today, just for the sake of time, similar to what Laura did. What I'll be talking about is a national survey that the Community Resource and Economic Development Indicators National Working Group did. I want to give a shout out to Susan Jakes, who I know is on, helped me put together the proposal. We actually used some data that Sarah Rocker from the NERCRD and Penn State University put together last year. Scott Chasden and Walt Whitmer helped to put together the survey, as well as did some of the analysis. Big call out to Josset Ghali from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who did a heavy lift of coding last week, so much appreciated there. And then both Sridhar and Michael Doherty did some feedback on development of tools and instruments and things like that. So obviously this is not just me in this work. Everyone sort of stands behind me, and I appreciate your time and attention today. So we are the Community Resource and Economic Development National Indicators Working Group. There are about 13 or so of us around the country. Just a little shout out to the West. I'm kind of lonely out here. Cheryl's my closest person, who I just realized was recently that she's actually, I believe, on Mountain Time. But I would love to have a colleague join me who's interested in community development work and evaluation. And so if you are, feel free to give me a shout. Otherwise, you can see us up there on the screen. Everyone plays an important role, and we represent all of the regions around the United States. So what our work in essence is, what motivates us, is the need to tell compelling stories. We're interested in understanding the collective impact of our community and economic development work. We believe that by gathering these collective impacts, we're able to leverage both off of each other as well as the work that we're doing. And it also allows us to develop additional support for CRED programming and to make strategic decisions. So the information that we gather, we share with our national program leaders, our state representatives at various levels, as well as local and all of that. So the work is both individual as well as collective, which gives it some additional power. So let's talk a little bit about why we're gathered today. In essence, as a group, a National Indicators Working Group, we were interested in understanding part of what community development practices and programs had come about as a result of COVID-19. We've been in this pandemic for over a year now, and we know that the work happening around the country is very focused on community development, and so we wanted to better understand it. In addition to that, we didn't want to just know about the work, we also wanted to understand how it was being evaluated. And so there's a team of community development and evaluation extension specialists, and we developed a survey. We put together about 5 questions that was asking specifically about activities sorted by categories as well as evaluation data. I'm hoping some of this sounds familiar to you. Maybe you filled it out. The categories were actually developed based on some data that was gathered for the 2020 NACDEP conference. The national program leaders get to gather every conference, and Sarah Rocker, who I mentioned earlier, was with the Northeast, I always mess this up, I have it written down, the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development, put together a brief survey. And it was in essence asking national program leaders what they were seeing in regards to challenges, as well as innovations and adaptations in programming. So we wanted to take that a step further and open it up beyond national program leaders to the rest of community development specialists. What kind of work is happening within these categories? What are you specifically doing? And so we fielded our survey using a variety of listservs. We sent it out through NACDEP. Hopefully you saw it. We used our regional rural development centers to send it, and also a number of state and local listservs that we used. As of right now, that sample is slightly lower. We actually have 72 responses as of this morning. We did not specifically ask for state, what state someone was with, but we did geocode the latitude and longitudinal data. So about 59 of those 70 had identifying information. So we know we received responses thus far from about 27 states. The majority of the states had between 1 and 3 responses. I want to give a shout out to Kentucky, who had actually 7 responses. So the highest state must be doing a lot of really good community development work. So we appreciate their time and effort. The data analysis was completed by 2 evaluation specialists. As I mentioned, Josset Ghali did a very heavy lift, and Scott Chasden stepped up and helped as well. Our category responses were, we did a deductive coding process where our category responses were coded into subcategories initially, the overall categories that we set. And then from there, it was a bit of an iterative process, and there was some inductive coding that went on to create subcodes. And so what I want to do is actually go through what we found. And that's kind of the heart of today. So there was actually 2 types of community development activities that are happening around the country related to COVID-19. The first is related to adapted programming. So in essence, it's community development programming that was occurring prior to COVID-19, but it needed to be adapted in some way. And so people talked about what those adaptations might have looked like. For example, moving things into a virtual setting that used to be done in person. The second type of activity was an initial response to COVID. So doing a new type of community development program that didn't exist before, that is happening only because COVID-19 has come about. So you can see our categories there at the bottom. Economic development on the community level was the highest response rate for the type of programs. We had about 31 instances of programming that's happening within that, and then it goes down from there. So we have leadership and civic engagement, economic development related to businesses and entrepreneurial work, sustainable food systems. There's that other category, which is a little bit of everything. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, community planning, and then the final category all the way over to the side is arts, culture, and placemaking. So what does this actually look like when we're talking about these types of activities? So the number 1 type of economic development community level work that was happening was related to sharing economic recovery strategies. So for example, one community development specialist shared that they'd been doing something called 5-Star Fridays, and it was a blast that highlighted the ideas to business and communities. It was a tool that aggregated and helped people stay motivated. Other things were promoting networking and collaboration, analyzing decision support economics, resources, grant writing. For example, someone led a multiple COVID-19 relief grants and ended up with over $500,000 that they were able to support in recovery efforts. And then of course that ubiquitous other category, which is a little bit of everything. Leadership and civic engagement was the next most commonly cited program type that was occurring. The top type within this subcode or category within this overall category was providing training, coaching, and mentoring for local leaders. So for example, a program development specialist or a community development specialist talked about a 6-week webinar series. And they were doing things like navigating change, well-being, critical thinking, things like that. Moving civic engagement online. So this is an example of one of those adaptations to COVID-19. So they had been doing civic engagement in person, and instead they needed to move to an online category. So things like digital civic engagement work continued utilizing skills from local college students to support small town engagement. Other things would be like adapting existing programming, as I just mentioned, COVID-19 response coalition support. And an example of that would be as part of a state COVID task force, we delivered PPE testing and vaccine to counties. The next category is related to economic development and business and entrepreneurs. So in this case, the common categories, the top two were creating entrepreneurship systems and support and sharing relevant economic info during COVID. So an example of that, someone talked about how they partnered with other entities to establish an online job posting site that was connecting veterans looking for work with farmers needing workers. Again, we see that adapting existing programming to online. And then another category, helping local businesses stay afloat, is actually an example of how some of the categories and examples that people provided don't just fall within a single code. We would often find that there were multiple codes or multiple types of categories that the work fell within. And so keep in mind that it's not black and white, it's not singular. Instead, it was there were sometimes multiple, up to 3 to 4 codes would apply to a single type of community development programming that was talked about. Some additional economic development related specifically to business and entrepreneurs, promoting networking and collaboration, and providing financial resources during COVID. So for example, this person actually had talked about receiving over $750,000. Specifically, it was related to COVID relief funding, and they were actually forgivable loans. And in order for the recipient to get forgiven, they needed to attend at least 2 trainings, and they found that that was helping to promote sustainability for small businesses. So there's sort of this concept of killing multiple birds with a single stone, in that they're providing financial resources, but then they're also finding ways to promote training and get extra information out to small businesses to help sustain them. And then finally, a couple last ones down there, strengthening business success and transition, and supporting food systems. And actually, sustainable food systems is the next very broad category. We had 23 types of examples. The largest subcode under this was training, consulting, and support. Things like operating essential businesses safely during COVID, assisting food coalitions, doing agritourism, helping farmers, working with local food businesses, and again, some additional safe COVID business operations, not necessarily for essential businesses. An example, agricultural in this state was deemed an essential business, and so they found ways to help those working with migrant labor. This was one of a Kentucky example, where Kentucky Small Business Development Centers and other consultants to help small businesses figure out to ensure that migrant workers were having physical distancing available to them. Other types of food systems work included other types of adapted programming, promoting business network collaboration, convening community conversations, and then fundraising support. There was a local food pantry that got assistance from a local extension office to obtain funding because of course, increased need in COVID. And they also got some additional freezers to increase their storage capacity. Community planning was next on our list of programs that were happening around the country. Regular programming adapted to new formats, things like needs assessments, figuring out different ways to do comprehensive planning processes, providing support to coalitions, functioning in a virtual no contact environment, which is new for a lot of people. And then again, that concept of training, mentoring, and coaching came up here. For example, there was a community recovery workbook for a regional roundtable for local government leaders, as well as providing webinars on pandemic response and recovery. Diversity, equity, and inclusion was another category that we specifically inquired about. We found here that often the most common program discussed was related to training colleagues or community members on DEI topics. So for example, one extension community development specialist talked about how they created forums to share stories and instruction on DEI over webinars, specifically for a leadership class. as well as to directors of a program. And then they provided suggested other diversity speakers for other organizations. So just because COVID-19 hit doesn't mean that their DEI work stopped. Instead, they transitioned and found ways to train colleagues in a different manner. Other ways, program development related to this. For example, one group mailed flyers to targeted zip codes, and they found they had a really great response from first generation extension clientele. So finding a way to actually expand programming to those who don't typically get extension programming. And then including diverse voices into COVID responses in a way that hadn't been done before. And then finally, our last primary category, other than other, was art, culture, and placemaking. In this case, we had about 14 examples. And I have to admit, this is my favorite category because it really, the examples were amazing, talking about how people were promoting social connection and sense of community through arts. I had a hard time choosing just 2 examples. The first one was how educators and parents were being assisted with digital art resources, take-home art kits, virtual art exhibitions, distributing art resources that were addressing mindfulness, positive mental health, and skill development. Placemaking, which if you're not familiar with, is when people or groups or organizations do improvements to the built environment to promote safe meeting spaces. So for example, an extension specialist talked about how they led efforts to create a new picnic area and an existing trail to help accommodate that need for outside meeting spaces. Tables were distanced, and the use of the trail actually tripled during the first year of the COVID restriction, which is pretty impressive, given that the idea that so many places did need to shut down. Other types of arts and culture placemaking work included training and resources, and then other. So in addition to all of those types of categories, we also ask the question, are you doing evaluation with this work? Are you somehow evaluating the type of COVID-19 related community development work you're doing? Just over half the respondents, about 52%, said that they were evaluating their COVID-19 related work. And in this case, the majority of those said that they were collecting outcomes, things like short-term, medium, not short-term, things like knowledge gain, medium-term related to behavioral change. A few less were collecting outputs, for example, the number of participants, the number of workshops. Only about a third were collecting impacts. This is your systemic change, your environmental change. Understandable, we're sort of only reaching that point now where people were able to really collect those impacts given the amount of time. You can't really collect impact after just 3 months. You need a longer time frame. So we're getting to that point right now. And then, of course, we always give that other category to people to be able to choose. We found that for the most part, the majority of people who are collecting data were using surveys. Second most common way, we're doing key informant interviews, which of course makes sense given the idea that much of this had to be done online or in a virtual setting. So I want to talk just briefly about the next steps that we have planned before the last 5 minutes for Q&A. So we're continuing to collect data. I do want to, hopefully I can do 2 things at once. I don't have it. I used to have the actual, the link. So hopefully one of my colleagues can post the link. If not, then I will try to get it to you another way. If you're interested in filling out the survey and you haven't done so, it has gone out in a couple different locations. We do hope to conduct some additional data analyses. We're looking to do some refinement of the coding scheme. It's relatively broad right now. We sort of kept with those overall oh, there we go. Sarah's all over it. Thank you, Sarah. We have some pretty broad categories and then just one set of subcodes. And so it would be interesting to kind of refine that and get a little more into it. We'd also like to do things like add regional breakouts. So the Northeast, Sarah and Walt, if you're part of that group, you heard a teaser of this information shared yesterday just related to Northeast. We'd like to do that for the rest of the regions. And of course, there's always more ways to look at data. We also want to delve a little more deeply into the evaluation piece. We asked for contact information for people who are willing to speak a little more with us. And so we're going to be reaching out to them to collect some additional data. And of course, always, if you're interested in this work and you want to hear more, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always excited to talk about the work and to have fellow colleagues around the country telling us what they're doing and sharing with us. So with that, I have the last 5 minutes set aside as requested for questions and or comments. Within the room, we have a whole host of us that are here today. So if I can't answer it, hopefully one of my fellow colleagues can. So Ramona asked whether the team's able to share results of programs by category, by region. Yes, so we have all of the results already done by category. We haven't done it by region yet, but we do have the ability to do that for some of the data. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, Ramona, I know you have my email address. Feel free to reach out to me and I can share some information to you related to the topics that you're interested in. Other questions or comments from anybody? We have about 4 minutes left, so we can either all leave early or someone can ask a question. I can go with either, I don't mind.
Rebecca, I have a question.
Yeah.
How long is the survey going to be open? I'm sorry if you said that already.
You know, we didn't, because we originally weren't actually thinking about keeping it open. That's sort of a new development. We just thought about it this previous week. Walt Whitmer is actually the person who made the request. So I'm guessing that we'll probably keep it open for at least another couple weeks. If we're able to send out a reminder through the rural development centers, we might do the regional rural development centers. We might do that to try to solicit some additional information.
Just to echo that a bit, so if you haven't completed it or you didn't see it earlier, certainly now's the time to do that and or share it with colleagues you think might be interested or have valuable information to contribute.
Yes, please do so. Any other questions or comments from anybody? Walt or Sarah, was there anything that came up yesterday during the Northeast conversation?
I was just actually typing quickly, so quickly that I made a typo. So actually my comment was actually to the audience that besides the way of sort of slicing the data by region and by category, if there's any other ways that from the data you've seen so far today that comes to you of how you would like us to stratify and analyze this, we're really open to your feedback. We want this data to be useful to you. And while I don't think we had enough time to ask that question of our Northeast colleagues, we sort of gave of the topics that Rebecca shared, just some examples of what your neighbors in the Northeast were doing. So it was just sort of more meant to be inspiring of what's happening on the ground. But that is my curiosity and my question to the group of, is there any other way that you'd like to see the data sort of split and organized that would be relevant to you? And then Walt, please feel free to jump in on your reflections from yesterday.
No, Sarah, that captures it exactly, and was sort of what I was thinking as well, is sort of any additional ways that you think this might be useful, please talk to us, get in touch with us, because we've undertaken this, and the more we can make it useful, the better. I think people in the Northeast, there's some dissecting of categories, but I don't think in general that's all that particularly, because most things we do fall into these buckets, I guess is the issue.
Yeah, those buckets, as I mentioned earlier, were created from some information that the national program leaders had already provided us. And so we used that to be better informed when we created our categories.
And I think pretty well, they the results show that the buckets were fairly effective.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, and we'll obviously be sharing this with national program leaders as well. So please know that your voice is heard, not just with us, but also with others. And there's a couple of things popping up in the chat, so we'll be sure to capture that. In the meantime, I want to thank my other two presenters, Laura and Michael, as well as everyone who attended today. We certainly appreciate it. And with that, our session is over. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.